Welcome to Unleashed at Work and Home. I'm Colleen Pilar, and this is where pet professionals come for honest conversations about what it really takes to show up for yourself while serving the animals you love. If you've ever felt caught between compassion and exhaustion, you're in the right place. Here we explore what it means to reconnect with your inner wisdom and rediscover the joy that brought you to this work. Make sure to join my email community at colleenpilar.com for gentle, practical insights designed specifically for pet professionals. Now, let's dive in. Welcome back to Unleashed at Work and Home. My guest today is Ellen Yoakum, and she's a behavior specialist at Pet Harmony. Welcome, Ellen. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I realized, as I said it, behavior specialist is a sort of a broad term, but it felt accurate. But I don't know that that's what you'd call yourself. Is that what you'd call you? What do you say?
It depends on who I'm talking to and what they're asking, because I wear a lot of different hats. So behavior specialist is fine. Behavior consultant is fine. Animal behavior consultant is fine. And then sometimes I'm a pet parent. And then sometimes I'm a whole human. That's not all the
Really?
time, though.
Not all the time, though.
Yeah.
Isn't that true for all of us? Not all the time, though,
Mhm.
but sometimes. Yeah, it is interesting how our identities carry labels, and sometimes we see the label as all of it, and we're so much more than what any label. And for lots of my clients, there's a whole identity piece of like, well, for me even, when I shifted from dog training to coaching, I had this moment of like, well, who am I if I'm not a
Mhm.
dog trainer? And it was deeply uncomfortable and incredibly valuable to explore that. So to notice that there's an image associated with words people put upon us. And those words can also be uh, behavior ones,
Mhm.
like you're friendly or you're a people pleaser or you're a good host, whatever the thing.
Mhm.
So we've veered into weird territory already, and we haven't even gotten started. Just the interesting thing of what do we call ourselves and others, and how much of that encompasses the human experience. So let's start with the human experience.
Mm.
I like to ask people to tell me what they thought they wanted to do with their career when they were 10. Like, what did 10-year-old Ellen think she was going to do when she grew up? And so let's go right there. So what was that idea?
I thought I was going to be a teacher because I thought overhead projectors and whiteboards were super fun. Like, that was the crux of why I wanted to be a teacher. I thought using those two tools was fun. And I am a teacher, not
And
like
you
a
are.
teacher in a classroom, but I teach lots of things, lots of things.
I thought overhead projectors was an amazingly complicated technology for a lot of people. Um, and I
Mhm.
always had feelings of how we might actually help somebody use them better or more effectively. Or like, it's sort of interesting that for a lot of people, they may never have even encountered an overhead projector or what it was like when people were trying to show
Yeah.
something on a screen before we all had all these million screens.
Yeah.
Um, but overhead projectors, it was both cool and very uncomfortable if somebody, they were forever putting things backwards on them
Yes.
or just, interesting thing. But you, little Ellen, in the classroom was like, now that's an interesting tool.
Mhm. Yeah. I just thought they were neat. I I don't know what about them was so interesting to me. I have no idea. I just did.
So let's talk about that for perspective, because that's also another common piece of the human experience that
Mhm.
we do find things that are just neat and
Mhm.
we just like them and we cannot articulate why. So
Mhm.
I just think it's neat. What's something else that you just really like and you're not really entirely sure what it is about that thing, but you just like it?
That's a good question. I don't know because part of the other, at least Ellen experience, I don't know some humans, not all humans, is a lot of time pondering my own experience these days as like an empathy building exercise. Like, what is my experience and how could others differ in this
Mhm.
experience? Like, what is so uniquely. It's not even uniquely me. It's just I haven't encountered somebody else that thinks this way or talks this way or feels this way or perceives things this way. Um, so I think I could probably give you a reason why for most of the things that I find really neat these days.
It's also sort of a kind of a trick question because it's just sort of the water we swim in. That it's just normal and natural that, of course, we would like this thing. Of
Yeah.
course we would, because we do. Period.
Yeah.
End of story. And that's something that someone who knows us well might observe and be like, "Oh, it's so interesting how
Yeah.
you would like." I particularly like little things that are versions of big things. So, like on my desk, I have a little school bus. I like it because it's just like this little
Yeah.
visualization of a group of people traveling together in the same way to learn. So, like, for me and my community,
Yeah.
it feels like we don't need everybody, but those of us who want to join together and go somewhere together, this
Mhm.
adorable little school bus. And it's not even always so much the meaning that I put behind it, but I just think it's so darn cute when it's little. So, like, a
I
little tiny anything. Give me I have a
They're so
Kong
cute.
keychain
I do
because,
too.
oh my gosh, a Kong keychain, how cute. Like, what I will do when that one breaks, it'll be very
Yeah.
sad because I've had it for years and it's so cute. I
It's
like
so
little
cute.
things.
I had to take it off because my dogs thought it might be a real Kong, and
Yeah.
so they kept trying to take my keys, but I have it. It's actually sitting right over there because I also think it's just adorable.
Mhm.
I mean, I think for me, back to the introspection and the exploration I find interesting in itself. So I think maybe that's the thing that, like, I think humans are neat
Oh, yeah.
because what do you mean that there are two of us? We're humans. We're both humans. And I have a friend and colleague, it gets over 70 degrees and she is irritated and cranky and, like, needs AC. Just biologically cannot handle over 70 degrees, and I am the opposite. Until it gets to, like, 75, I am bundled up, blankets, sweatshirts, all of the things, and if it's below really, like, 65, I'm cranky. And so, we're both humans, and we have such wildly different perceptions of the world that we live in, and it's just fascinating. And we could
Yeah.
probably track it back to any number of influences on human evolution and environment and the actual physical bodies we live in and the way that they process. But at the end of the day, I don't have information on any of that. I know that Emily hates above 70, and I know that I'm shivering if it's below 65.
Yep. It is it's fascinating to see how very, very different we are, and yet we're all humans.
Mhm,
And same thing with dogs too, where,
mhm,
clients would say, "Well, have you ever worked with a" fill in the breed. Um, and the reality is, well, either yes or no. Yes, I have worked with that breed before, or no, I haven't. But the reality is, I haven't worked with your dog before.
mhm,
And so there's a lot we need to know. I need to learn about this particular dog or this
mhm.
particular experience. So yeah, this.
'Cause your dog may be a Great Pyrenees, and they may have not gotten any of the memos about
Mhm,
what we assume that would mean.
mhm. Yeah, it is. When I was doing more work with kids and dogs, I would be contacted occasionally for articles in major
Mhm.
magazines, and the most common question was, "What's the best breed of dog for families with kids?" And it cannot be answered that way.
No.
And it was frequently I was not used in the article because my answer was convoluted, and someone else would give an answer.
Mhm.
Um, but it's a tricky thing of that we would like t we have a desire to categorize and to sort and to, um, find clarity and comfort in that, and yet there's always nuance and things like that. So let's pull that into being a behavior consultant.
Yeah.
That would feel like that would be a really great asset, that you have a desire for introspection and exploration and sort of looking at behavior, human, canine,
Mhm.
other,
Mhm.
from this level of, so what's going on here? So tell me a little bit. Hmm, I have two questions in my head. This
Mm.
always happens to me. Um, Yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Like, how oh, no, now I have more.
Oh, I
Let
love
me
this. This
ask
is exciting.
this question. How do you think your own introspection, you learning about you, helps make you a better behavior consultant?
It's what makes me a behavior consultant is the way that I feel. So when I put my behavior consultant hat on, because I also have what I consider a trainer hat, I have a behavior consultant hat. Again, those are labels. For me, it is the lens through which I am viewing the way that I am facilitating and helping. So when I have my trainer hat on, I'm really focused on mechanics. I'm focused on the present. I'm focused on the here and now. I am focused on criteria and antecedents and consequences. I'm looking at a much more finite splice of what this entire thing is. When I put my behavior consultant hat on, I am looking at a much more robust timeline. I am looking at long-term antecedents and consequences. I am looking at all of these different elements that make up a familial unit. So I'm looking at a life care plan, not just how do we get a dog to sit in a square sit on an elevated platform for 30 seconds or something like that. It's much more broad. Being able to look at the life care plan of one individual is hard enough. And then when you start layering in a second individual, so now I have the dog's life care plan and how the human facilitates that life care plan. Heaven forbid we have like 8 humans in the house. It
Mhm.
exponentially gets more complicated for each living creature that you have in there. And the part of introspection, or how do I experience the world and how is that different from others, means that it's much easier for me to not say you should do it this way because it works for me. And so I can
Mhm.
say I've never lived with kids. My partner and I are a dual income, no kids family. That's just the way that it is. And so I could never tell a parent or a guardian what's going to work for them because I don't have that experience. I don't need that experience though to help them figure out what will work for them. Doing that introspection means I've developed questions and alternatives and ways to think about and look at things so that I can help people figure out what's going to work for them instead of having to figure out for myself what will work for them.
That is such a beautiful answer. I love all of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's such value in being able to do that, to recognize what's true for me isn't true for everyone, and sometimes that I don't even know what's true for me until I stop and look, and that's the most interesting part is to discover what what our own
Mhm.
experience is and how it may or may not be what we thought it was, and what we're bringing and adding on top of it.
Mhm.
So, you thought you were gonna be a teacher, and in many ways you are a teacher, but if we were to say to an average 10-year-old, uh, and here's Ellen, she's a teacher, that's not what they're picturing. There's a different image of
Mhm.
what that might have been. So, give me the journey from being this kid who thought she was going to be a teacher to becoming this form of teacher that you are now. How did you get from there to here?
On a roller coaster and on whims, realistically. So, I mean, I made it through elementary school, middle school, high school, graduated, and went to the University of Washington. And when I was at the University of Washington, you get in your undergrad program and you're kind of dabbling. You're trying different areas, different classes, different general electives, that kind of stuff to see what would fit. And I fell into the psychology department. And at the University of Washington at the time, the psych department was really heavily intertwined with the biology department, and they had a rather robust animal behavior program. And so to fulfill some of my necessities, like research, because I was in a Bachelor of Science, so I needed research credits and all of those things, I found mentors and professors that were doing research in captive animal welfare. And that seemed cool. And so I ended up doing a lot of the animal behavior focused education at the University of Washington. I was incredibly lucky that I had professors that believed in me and was like, I had a mentor years ago, Lisa Clifton Bumpus, that I heard say, surround yourself with people in a room full of opportunities are going to speak your name. And those were the professors that I had. So I got to participate in all sorts of things, got internships, and just kind of followed that path for quite a while. I did a blip over in the corporate world um, because, frankly, capitalism. Um, and it didn't work for me. So I left that. I dabbled in wildlife rehab and dog daycare and boarding and some of the other things. And then in 2015, my partner and I moved down to Florida to work with a facility that does free flight education programs with birds. We did that, both worked in different shows and at their kind of home base doing more of like a zookeeping type role there. And then in 2018, we needed to move back to the Pacific Northwest, and I started doing dog classes, dog training, all of those things. And it has cascaded from being an assistant in dog training, dog classes, to co-owning a business focused on helping pets and their people live harmoniously. And I work directly with clients that are experiencing, we can toss around the different language, but the way that I perceive myself in the role for this clients is helping with quality of life concerns, either for themselves or their pet or a combination of the two, and helping professionals develop the skills to also do that.
Yeah. So if you told 10-year-old Ellen this is what she was going to be doing now, how would she have responded?
I don't know that she would have believed this was a thing, because I didn't have exposure to this sort of field when I was younger. So I don't think I like, if I was to transport back in time and be like, "Hey, little me, this is what you're gonna do." One, I'm a very literal person, and so I would have been like, "No, you're lying. You can't time travel." So I wouldn't be in disbelief in that regard, but I don't think that I would have even known what that meant.
Yeah. It's kind of cool to think about, like, because what your experiences have been so varied,
Mhm.
um, and that they all come together to serve in your current role in different ways. Yeah, it's an interesting frame. I know 10-year-old me would have been thrilled out of my mind to know that I was going to be a dog trainer, and shocked and horrified to think that I would ever do like coaching or speaking on stages or any of that. She would be like, no.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
the dog trainer piece, she would have been like, really?
yeah.
Like,
I think the, like, working with the animals part, stoked, so excited. But, I think it probably shocks most of the people that knew me as a kid that the core of what I do these days is working with very closely with other humans in emotionally charged scenarios. That was
yeah,
not what anybody would have expected.
same here. Yeah. And yet, part of being human, like,
Mhm.
we are going to have emotionally charged situations,
Yes.
and isn't it lovely to have somebody who can support us in them?
Yes.
It matters, and we know that that's a huge concern for families with their pet animals, that
Correct.
it does become quality of life issues all the way around, sometimes related to beliefs of, like, what is good or fine or good for this experience or fair or,
Mhm.
any of these things, and sometimes just around, like, logistics of
Yes.
how to do some of this stuff. So, what do you find, like, personally really reinforcing about the work that you do?
I mean, when my clients don't need me is always gonna be the best. And not even necessarily because we have resolved the thing. My goal is that my clients don't need me long before their dog doesn't need the support, because my goal is to develop skills for them that they are able to
Mhm.
navigate the world with this dog and hopefully other pets in the future, that they don't have to rely on me to make the decisions and to assess the situation and figure out where to go from here. I'm always happy to do that because life is hard enough, and there have been plenty of times in my life where I don't want that responsibility. I just want you to tell me what to do. And I will happily do it, but I don't have the cognitive labor available to do the planning and all of those things. But I would prefer to be there when my client needs that support from a cognitive standpoint than needs my support because I didn't give them the skills. So when I have a client that I'm working with and they're like, okay, so here's what happened. One, it wasn't great, but it's okay because I learned something. That's a huge win for me because I have a lot of clients that are they carry so much weight with the
Yeah.
experience with their dog, and one poor experience for their dog or one not ideal experience feels catastrophic. So once we're able to get through that and all of those things don't feel like catastrophe, that's one big win. The second one is when they said, this happened, this is what I learned, and this is what I think I should do differently next time. What do you think? You don't need me anymore. Like, no notes. You've got this. That's the second part that I always find really, really wonderful.
That's awesome. That's awesome. It is true. Like, you want them to leave with skills that they're gonna use with this dog and future, or
Mhm.
maybe not dog, because I know you do more than dogs. My
Yep.
bias is dogs, so I always wind up back in dogland, and I forget
The
sometimes that
proportion
I
of
do that.
clientele that we see is largely skewed dogs. I also work with cats and birds, but I would do other species too, but they don't tend to find us as easily because,
Yeah.
internet searches and whatnot.
Yeah, all of that.
Mhm.
Whatever the magic of all of that is, it
Correct.
changes every day.
Yes.
Um, so I like to ask my guests to share some words that have meaning for them, and you shared a quote that, I have a lot of curiosity about.
Mhm.
The quote is, "It also works with porcupines." Do tell.
Yeah. So one, I have been following Ken Ramirez's work for many, many years. I find the things that he has facilitated to be absolutely inspiring and incredible. And one of the things that I really love about learning from Ken is Ken constantly goes back to the basics. So while there's these other new shinies popping up everywhere that are groundbreaking and earth shattering and all of these things, Ken's like, okay, but foundations really helpful. And I saw a presentation he gave at Clicker Expo on generalization. And then my partner was in Ken's snake avoidance class. And there were all sorts of questions in both of these places. But what about, but what about, but what if? And we got all of these prompts. But what about if you're trying to teach a dog to avoid feces? What if you're trying to teach a dog to avoid goats? What if you're trying to avoid the something something? And Ken said, yes, it also works with porcupines. And my partner and I giggled, and that has now become a shorthand in either our conversations back and forth or me with myself to say, I think you're overcomplicating this. You already have something to pull out and plug into this, what you think is a new scenario. So instead of asking, but what about, I switched it and said, it also works with porcupines. What's it? Because now I'm investigating what are the skill sets I already have that I can use in this scenario rather than saying, I need this other shiny that's going to solve all of my problems for this one
Yeah.
tiny scenario.
And so what's it? It also works with porcupines. And what's it? That's such a valuable reframe
Mhm.
for a situation where you're like, okay, so, and yes, Ken always goes back to the basics, but
Mhm.
this idea of what's going to fix this is probably something you already have access to in some
Mhm.
way. And, maybe a modification or a little bit of learning around the edges on something. But
Yep.
for the most part, you have something at hand
Mhm.
that also works with porcupines. I love that.
It changes the entry point from this very specific scenario to something already known or better known. So if I'm like, meal planning hasn't been working for whatever reason, and I need something to make sure that I'm keeping food in the house and that I'm meeting my dietary restrictions and all of those things. instead of going and saying, I need a really rigid meal planning thing and going to somebody on the internet that has a very different activity budget than I do, meaning they have very different ways that they spend their time. They already have background systems maybe they've set up. I can say, what is meal planning? It is making sure that I have food for XYZ amount of things. I know that I can't do like a rigid Monday we're doing this, Tuesday we're doing this, so I need some flexibility. What in my life already looks kind of like that setup that I can then adjust and tweak. And that has been really helpful. And for me, it was my dog is enrichment. So I know that I have snuffle mats and lick mats and chews and 4 or 5 different activities. I make an enrichment menu for my dogs. Do the same thing for meal planning. I also know that I make sure to keep shelf-stable things in the house for my dogs so that we always have it. That was another thing we can take for meal planning. What are 4 or 5 meals that I can keep everything on hand all of the time so that we always have a fallback, particularly when the cognitive load is heavy elsewhere.
I love that. I love how your brain works. I
Thank
am
you.
a person who has sort of a messy brain, um, and I have trouble sorting things into, like, really clear boundaries, and when someone else gives me a frame or a way of looking at things, like, for example, activity budget,
Mhm.
you know, that's really helpful to me because then
Mhm.
I can take it and use it,
Yeah.
and, um and you and I have had experiences together in the past where we've had multiple conversations beyond this one where being able to apply labels to squishy things in the way that you're particularly gifted with is very helpful because, again, people do think different ways.
Yeah.
And so your strategy that you just shared here is a great example of it also works with porcupines,
Mm.
because on the surface, these are different, you know, how you're
Mm.
providing for your dog's enrichment and how you're feeding yourself doesn't sound quite the
Mhm.
same. I mean, yes, food is often involved in both, but
Mhm.
beyond that, they're kind of different, but yet they aren't.
Mhm.
Um, so looking at that. So because I did just mention labels and
Mhm.
activity budget, you briefly defined it,
Mhm.
but spell that out. What does it mean to you when you say,
Mhm.
"Oh, I have a different activity budget than someone else?"
Yeah. So, because I have a bit of a background in captive animal welfare, very specifically in captive animal welfare and enrichment, environmental enrichment, one of the things back in the late 2000s slash 2000s, maybe, and metrics have changed, but in the time when I was doing that research, activity budgets were the way that we typically assessed the efficacy of enrichment. So what we would do is look at how does an animal spend its time? How do we expect an animal to spend its time in comparison to its what we would consider wild counterparts? So if I know that uh, uh, this is a very rough because breeds are their influences into dog
Right.
sleeping patterns, but if I know that dogs sleep somewhere between, like, 16 and 18 rest 16 to 18 hours a day, and I have a person who comes and says their dog sleeps 6 hours a day, that's a big problem. Like, that's a that's a huge problem, and so what I'm trying to do is get that rest to look more like what we would consider a quote, unquote, "behaviorally healthy" or behaviorally sound counterpart. So for me, I can take that same idea. I am captive animal in my house for all intents
Mhm.
and purposes. I am a human, whatever. Um, I am a primate. And so what does a human activity budget look like? What does a human activity budget now look like versus what is a human activity budget with the evolutionary pressures that we have had industry and technology far surpass evolution's ability to keep up. So I know that I spent a lot of time sitting at a desk that is not in alignment with what we would expect from a human activity budget. How do I
Right.
balance that? And also, take care of the house, and do all of the things that are expected of us in this day and age. So
Thank
the
you.
activity budget comes down to, if we watch an animal, how do we observe that they spend their time?
Hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's so helpful for us on our own level too.
Mhm.
Like looking at it, oof, how are we spending our time and how does it feel while we're spending our
Mhm.
time in those ways? What are the results of that?
Yeah. And it helps a lot with my clients to understand that, like, base human activity budget is 8 or so hours of sleep. Also, assuming that there's going to be some wind down and wind up time. So I usually assume humans are down for the count for 10 hours. That changes depending on any number of things. Some people need more sleep, some people need less. I know that humans have to feed themselves roughly 3 times a day. Like, that's the general, that's a tricky one. That is very individual, but I'm going to assume as a baseline, most individuals are eating at kind of like 3 intervals a day. And that takes maybe 45 minutes a meal if you were to also account for like time to go to the grocery store and everything that goes into feeding a human. Again, ebbs and flows. If you got little ones, it's very different. I know that humans, the recommendation from medical stuff is this amount of movement a week. And when we start to tally that up, I know that my clients, on top of work and travel and commute and other things, I'm not asking people to do much a day. I'm asking for sometimes, like, change the way you feed your dog. Let's just start there. Let's not add anything, because I see what you do in a day and you don't have time, and you could do it for a short period, and we're here for the marathon, not the sprint.
That's genius. So you're kind of a quality of life expert. If I could give you a magic wand and you could, grant a blessing or bestow something upon pet professionals everywhere,
Mhm.
what would it be?
I like, an understanding of systems is always going to be my go-to, because systems let us take a load off. I told somebody for my mentees this year, my goal is to help people close cognitive tabs. So I know that we have so many tabs open in our brain trying to juggle so many things. So if I can help them close some of those so that they can spend their big, beautiful human brain on things that are for the big, beautiful human brain, and not, remembering to take out the trash or whatever, then we're going to do that. But the way that we close those tabs more easily and still do all of the things that we need or want to do is to create systems. And then it's also important to recognize when we're working in a system that it's not about us. Like, as a professional, it can feel really hard when things aren't going either the way we want, or we know that it could be different. And also, it's not about us. And our client may be navigating systems that are making what you want very unreasonable. So if it's like financial because they just had to go to the hospital and they have medical bills, that's not about you. It's not about your skills. It's not about anything. It's about the stress and the fact that your client is dealing with a system that is broken, or isn't broken, but is very violent. And that can help us have a lot of grace for ourselves when it feels like I could and should be able to do more and I can't.
Yeah. And that can help us have a lot of grace for ourselves when it
Yeah.
feels like I could and should be doing more, but I can't. Grace is a word that comes up in coaching conversations all the time. And I notice that it does not come up in my day-to-day conversations very often. And I think it's so interesting. There is that experience of needing systems that support us that we have the autonomy to create, and also recognizing that we do live within systems that we can influence in our own ways in our own small thing, but we individually are expected to just live within the system.
Mm.
And grace is kind of the piece people are reaching for, that understanding of that they're doing what they can
Mhm.
to set themselves up for the kind of life they want to have, and that it's not a failing when they don't always get what they're
Mhm.
what they're reaching for, but also this I don't know, there's connotations here in grace that I haven't quite teased out, but there's a self-rapport,
Mhm.
uh, an acknowledgement of themselves, uh, and I think it's so beautiful, and I love that it popped out when you were describing what having knowledge of systems would do for a person, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
That's
'Cause I mean, I've
and we'll take it.
I've been there where you're like, you're having a lot of feelings, and if you haven't gone you're having a hard time. If you haven't gone through everybody has different learning histories. Some people need to really focus on this, like, in therapy. If you are somebody who's really in tune with your feelings and processing them, congratulations. That's nice for you. Um, but I think sometimes it's just, I'm having a hard time, and the most tangible thing is the human in front of me. But when we take a step back and say, the human's not to blame here. Like, we're working, they're living the best that they can, just like I'm living the best that I can. And also, I'm in a system that benefits from me and my client from not being able to define what enough is
Mhm.
and not being able to feel like enough. And so I don't feel like enough when I feel like I could have done more for my client. And there are plenty of scenarios where I did everything I possibly could have for that client, and am just annoyed that it wasn't what I wanted, and I need to have a little bit of a temper tantrum, and then I will be over it, and it will be fine. But it's not about us most of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be hard to remember because it feels so deeply impactful and personal,
Yeah,
um, but but in most cases, it really isn't.
yeah. And sometimes the answer is, I actually did the thing. Like, I have plenty of clients where I did the thing. We got to the end point, and back to, it wasn't quite enough for what we were looking for. So, like, I've had
Yeah.
plenty of single individuals that got up to their original goal because I largely work with separation anxiety, got up to their goal, and then their life changed and they have to be out of the house 8 hours. Previously, 2.5 was all that they needed to have a huge quality of life improvement. And now the goalpost moved. And, like,
Mhm.
that's hard. And also, you can't quit your job because your dog has a hard time home alone most of the time. Sometimes sometimes that's an option, and I don't ask that
Yeah.
of clients. That's
Yeah.
too much.
That's too much. That's too much.
Mhm.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation, kind of deeply philosophical, which is cool. I love that. If people wanted to learn more about you and your work, how could they do that?
They can find me at petharmonytraining.com. I'm also Pet Harmony is on, so many platforms.
I'll link them all so you don't have
You'll
to
link
spell them
all
all
of
out, but
the
if you if
platforms.
you
Okay.
if you'll send me the link or the
Yep.
platforms, I will
Perfect.
link everything and
They can find us on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. We also have a podcast, Enrichment for the Real World, where we talk about creating enriching environments for pets, their people, and the professionals who support them.
I'd like to add a plug for that podcast. I said earlier that I so admire the buckets, that you can sort things out and label things and make things clear. Um, the Pet Harmony podcast does a really nice job of making things really clear and accessible, so that people can have takeaways from it. So I've found it very valuable.
Mm.
Um, so for those of you who find my podcast frustrating because there's no structure, you might totally love the Pet Harmony one. Uh, but if you just care about passion and topics, you'll like both of them
Mhm.
because there's definitely passion there. But
Yes.
but it's um, to tie back to wanting to be a teacher, it feels like it's designed by teachers. It has a
Mhm.
real teaching element to it that I very much value. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
the whole Pet Harmony team, including you as particularly on this podcast
Mhm.
element. Um, that it is a very lovely educational resource for people.
I will send that to my team. That will make them smile today.
Well, good. Good.
Yeah.
Well, it's been so lovely talking with you today.
It's great talking with you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being here. That's our conversation for today. If something we talked about resonated, I invite you to sit with it. Notice what feels true and what you want to explore further. You don't have to have it all figured out to start moving toward what matters. Whatever showed up for you today, clarity, questions, even resistance, trust that it's pointing you towards something important. For more support, join my weekly notes at colleenpilar.com. And until next time, remember, you are enough. Always. Just as you are.